think the topic of this panel is extremely interesting, and it's very appropriate for me because I've kind of always inserted myself into my pieces intuitively. It hasn't been so much a conscious decision for me. I think it's just been something that I've been comfortable with. And I think for me, a lot of it comes from what I think is the power of the word I. You know, it's like if you're at a party and a dinner party or something and you're at a table and someone says, oh, I heard this really interesting story, you know, on the radio about this guy who got in a car accident. You know, sure, that's interesting, but if you say like, I got in a car accident yesterday, I mean, right away, that's extremely, the whole focus turns to you, I think. And I think that word still has power. And when you insert yourself into the documentary, you can kind of use that in a way that you can't if you're using a more neutral third-person voice. So I think that's something to remember, that, you know, radio is a very intimate medium. I used to work in film, and for film documentary, I actually very much prefer not putting myself in. I prefer a more neutral viewpoint, a more neutral narrator, because I think film more approaches the experience of seeing something or experiencing something in real life, whereas I still think radio is fundamentally a storytelling medium where it's like someone's telling you a story. And you can have all sorts of amazing soundscapes and amazing you know, sound effects, music, which I do. Most of my documentaries for ideas have had many, many tracks, and I'm very big on getting great location sound and building soundscapes and building scenes. But I still think there's something really powerful about the human voice, and I think there's something really powerful about feeling like someone's telling you a story. And so if you're going to have that voice, if you're going to have that narrator, why not break down the boundaries if you can, and make yourself as relatable to that audience as you can. So I think by putting yourself in there and by, you know, kind of making yourself a character, you do that, you know, and it also allows you, I think, to do some very specific things and some specific techniques that you can't do when you are not in it, or when you assume a more neutral stance. So for me, I'll get back to that a bit with my clips, some specific examples, but I've almost always done this. I would say I've probably done this in all of my pieces, although I haven't done it everywhere in all my pieces. And that's something that I think is interesting and is important to mention, is that just because you put yourself in your piece doesn't mean you have to be there all the time, wall to wall. You know, I like to kind of appear and disappear in my pieces. Generally, I've been doing stuff for ideas that's longer, so you have a bit more of luxury to do that. But I think that when I choose to be in there, it's when I feel like I want to help drive the story, or if I'm experiencing something on location as the doc maker that's interesting and I want the audience to hear that, then I put myself in, or I want to, you know, make a point. But if I've got a great piece of tape, somebody telling a really personal story, obviously I'm going to back out at that point. So I think you don't have to think, I'm always in, I'm not always in. You can kind of massage that as the doc goes along by using sort of music and sound to get in and out. And I think the point, or the title of the panel is good, because it's like, it's all about me, or is it? Well, it can be about you, but it's not necessarily all about you all the time. So I'm not a fan personally of that style, which has kind of become popular, of hosts or narrators constantly interjecting with their clips. I know that some NPR shows do that and people love it, but it's not really my cup of tea. So while I'm a huge fan of putting myself in documentary, I feel like you do have to do, I feel like it's best done when it's done in a sensitive manner. And just because you're in the piece doesn't mean you're the main character, or doesn't mean you're there all the time. It's like you can be a character, but it's important to know when to kind of back off, or to come to the fore, or to fade into the background a little more. So As far as specific examples when it works, I think it can almost always work when it's done properly. I think that, you know, a show like Serial has shown that even with like a murder trial, in which the main character did not have a personal relationship with that person before they began the story, but developed a personal relationship and became a character in that piece. I think that that's something that did make some people uncomfortable, but of course, the success of that show kind of speaks for itself. I think that, you know, I really liked it. I thought it was a great treatment of a subject that has been dealt with a lot of times, and I think that the fact that, you know, she was in there as a character really added a lot. So I wouldn't necessarily blanket say that there isn't really anything that's completely off limits. As far as specific examples, there's two ways that I like to use it, or well, there's many ways, but these are two ways that I came up with a panel, or things that I think that the ways you can use it where I think it frees you up in terms of technically or just, you know, from a device point of view. First of all, when you're gathering your clips, if you know you're going to be in the piece or you think you may be in the piece, it frees you up to be able to interact with your subjects more. It frees you up to be funny or to use those humorous moments that you have between you and your subjects, which I think, you know, are often the case when you're in the field. So I like to use it a lot for funny moments because if there's a moment of tape that's funny, especially a self-deprecating moment where I'm made to look silly or I'm made to look kind of like I'm out of it, I think that I almost always try and put that in because I think listeners really appreciate that. I think that listeners, even on a serious subject, I think listeners appreciate knowing that you're not some, you know, all-important voice of God. You know, they like to see your human side. I don't believe that it somehow undermines your credibility. I think people are very comfortable, contemporary audiences are very comfortable with seeing that human side, but still taking what you take seriously. Like, in fact, I think there was a study I heard about This American Life and the style that they use. And I think they did a poll where they found out that older people tended to find that style not authoritative, but younger people had no problem with it. So I think this is something that's a trend maybe, or something that is going to be more and more common. So to have a more buttoned down style where you're a character in the piece and your interactions with your subjects can come to the fore, I think is a way of inserting humor. And so it's also a way to get at issues related to the fact that you are actually reporting on something without making it heavy-handed. Anyway, this is a piece that I did for Ideas, and it's in Brazil, and this was about a specific initiative that this very, very rich man, he's a mining magnate, is doing in the jungle of southeast Brazil, and he's basically decided to put his whole fortune into building this kind of utopian community where people will live and interact with art and botanical gardens. And so he wants to he thinks that the whole world system is going to crash, the world financial system is going to crash, and this is going to be a new way of living with art and being surrounded by nature and art. And so I went down there to find out, is this working? What's going on? And he's a very, very interesting person. But of course, he's built this place in the middle of nowhere. You know, it would be like if you built this incredible contemporary art center and botanical garden outside of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan or something. You know, like the people there in this small mining town almost don't know what to make of it, and it's very much impacted their town. So I was just doing streeters, more or less, to find out how they thought this huge change had changed their town. So Brumadinho is light years from your typical tourist town. The people are dressed for the heat, and like most Brazilians, they're hospitable to a fault and love to shoot the breeze with a foreigner.
Yes, from Brumadinho.
Have you ever been to Inhotim?
Você já esteve em Inhotim? Só de passagem. Only very quick.
Have you noticed a change in Brumadinho since Inhotim?
Você já notou alguma mudança em Brumadinho desde que o time abriu?
Uma das mudanças é essa, gringos aqui na cidade.
Yeah. You are one of the changes. You are here.
What was the word he used?
Gringo. Yeah, many gringos coming here.
Okay. It was me doing streeters in this small town in Brumadinho, and basically I was with a Portuguese guide, and I asked this big dude who was like revving his motorcycle and didn't look like he really was that impressed with, me coming up to him with a microphone. I asked him how it had changed the town, and he gave an answer which I understood because I understand a little bit of Portuguese, and my guide said, "Oh, I said, "What did he say?" My guide kind of looked uncomfortable, and he said, "Oh, he said you are the change. It's, you. The fact that you are here is that you are the change." And actually, what he said was like, "Oh, there's all these gringos coming now." So, and I picked up the word gringos, and so like basically he was like making fun of me on tape and like kind of giving me the gears on tape. So the interaction between me, my interpreter, and this really macho dude, I think it was really nice. It was light, and it would have been impossible for me to use if I wasn't a character in the piece. So the second clip, which should be correct. So this is another way that I like to use being in the piece, and for me, again, I like to use it in narration. So if I'm in the piece, it allows me to free myself up and write scenes about things that I've experienced alone while doing the piece. I don't need to have a character experiencing those. I can actually experience something, and then I can relate that experience to the listener in more than just sound, because sometimes sound just doesn't quite, you're not able to clearly convey it. So if I'm a character in the piece, I can write those moments in, and a lot of times that'll be interacting with nature, that'll be with interacting with maybe a thought that comes into your mind or something that you want to have. So in this case, you can write stuff that only exists in the absence of character. Later that night, I decide to go for another walk in the windscreen, this time alone. It's late and the hallways are deserted, like I'm the last man in the moon base. It's silent, except for the buzzing of fluorescent lights and the comforting din of hot air being forced through the mule's lungs. Every so often I feel a draft from where the mule's skin is thinner. Snowdrifts piled up outside obscure many of the narrow windows. A sign warns against rollerblading. Security cameras keep watch. I reach the end of the mur and double back. I hear footsteps echoing far away, but I can't tell if they're coming from behind or in front. I turn a blind corner. A figure approaches in the distance. A man. There's time to size each other up. His lack of winter clothing tells me he's likely a resident. As we pass, we nod in friendly acknowledgement, like drivers on a lonely gravel road. So that was from a piece I did also for ideas about this building in northern Quebec called the Mur Écran, the windscreen, which is this large structure that was built in 1970 to house an entire mining community, basically. So the idea was that almost everything would be in this one building, because the winter in this building, or the winter in this place, gets extremely cold, so people could live in this kind of moon base all year round. So it was a very eerie place, so that clip gave me the option to kind of give the environment, or give the experience of walking in this place alone. As far as downsides or dangers, I think it's always a fear that if you're in the story, you'll either get involved or change the narrative, or be seen to take a side. I think that's something that is true of almost all documentary anyway, but you have to be more sensitive of it when you're in the piece or when you have a connection to the piece, like the doc that I'm currently working on, or that we're wrapping up with Steve is about a childhood friend of mine who's in prison for a violent crime. And, you know, while I haven't been in touch with this person for over 10 years, there's still a relationship there that I have, and I'm going to be a part of this piece. So you have to be careful that in being in there and making that connection, that you keep your distance to a certain degree. You know, I think that that's a valid concern, and I think that it's important to have disclosure. I don't think those are insurmountable obstacles, but I think, you know, I think this is something that all doc makers have to face anyway to a degree, because I think that, you know, we're not doing news. In news, it's expected that you're going to kind of come out of the gate and ask tough questions, and it's a more adversarial relationship. I think with documentary, most of the time these are real people. If you aren't willing to kind of open yourself up, or if you come out there with like guns blazing, they're just going to shut down, you know. So you have to build that rapport with people, and I think you know, build a comfort level with them while maintaining, obviously, making sure you don't have blind spots. But I think that that's, you know, by putting yourself in there and having that sort of making yourself a character, it's a good way of doing that. And I guess the final thing that I would say is another recent time that I put myself in the piece, or that I found that it tested my bounds a bit, was I recently did a piece for C'est La Vie about my wife and I, and specifically how my wife, who took my name upon marriage, couldn't use that name in Quebec because there's a law in Quebec that says that women must retain their maiden names upon marriage. They're not allowed to change without a very, very strict exception. So once I started figuring out that we wanted to do this, I started finding out that this was actually a very contentious topic, and it really polarized people. And so, you know, I had to say to my wife, like, we're going to be in this. How do you feel about people maybe not appreciating your viewpoint, or, you know, coming out there and criticizing you? And so, you know, if it's a subject that you don't know, or that, you know, maybe you don't have that sort of fear, but when it's somebody you know, or it's somebody in your family, or somebody that you're close to, you're more aware of that. But, you know, with her case, I told her how it was going to go down, and she was happy with that, and she said, I don't care, I'm perfectly fine. So she was made aware of that. But obviously when you're doing that, you have to also make sure that you don't treat that person differently than you would treat any other subject. So I think that that's a recent pitfall. Oh, and then I guess finally one last thing I'd say that has been really critical and has been great is I've always worked with fantastic editors and fantastic producers. I think the CBC has incredible producers. I've never had a bad experience in terms of, you know, I've had people that didn't maybe work out, but in terms of the people that I've worked with, it's always been amazing, and their judgment is so great that I think that that's who you need to lean on in a scenario like this, when you're figuring out what downsides there could be, or if you've gone too far in a certain direction. They're going to be able to help you, and that's why I think the Doc Project is so amazing, because it links up people like us who are maybe trying new things, trying things that are a bit more experimental or personal, with people that have this incredible experience. And so I would definitely say that, you know, lean on those people if you're unsure about whether you're in it too much, or if you're losing your thread or losing your objectivity. I think that it's really been a great experience in terms of working with those people. So that's it. Thank you.